In the year 2008, the world experienced an economic crisis. Perhaps no country experienced the effects of inflation worse than Zimbabwe, a country in southern Africa. In the first few months of 2008, the Zimbabwe dollar was seeing over 100,000% inflation. By July, it had reached a staggering 2.5 million percent. And by 2008, the Cato Institute estimated that the inflation had reached the incomprehensible number of 89 sextillion percent. To grasp that number in terms of seconds, just know that it would take over a quadrillion years to count. The inflation was so high that a new banknote was issued worth 100 trillion Zimbabwe dollars. What happened? How did inflation spin out of control? Could money printing have anything to do with it? My guest today is Paula Iverson, the host of the Bitcoin Edge podcast. She is from Zimbabwe and knows firsthand what hyperinflation feels like. Paula has an experienced background and soon found herself starting her very own Bitcoin podcast. Having recorded over 100 episodes now, she speaks to Bitcoiners and learns from them. She is one of the few female voices in the space and is a growing influence in Bitcoin. I am privileged to speak with her today about her experiences and what she's learned from hundreds of hours of conversations with Bitcoiners. I can't wait to dive in. It's time to reassess. Paula, thank you for being here today.
It's great to be here.
Well, it's been certainly, just a second ago when we were chatting, it's been nice to, get to know you finally. I've been following your podcast for several months now. And my first question I want to ask you is, what inspired you to start a Bitcoin podcast?
Well, I was at the time not happy in my job. I was not enjoying real estate, certain aspects of real estate, and that's what I do. And a friend of mine from when I was really young passed away in a car accident. And that really got me thinking about life and how valuable our time is. And at the same time, Bitcoiners were saying to me, time is our most valuable resource. So I kept thinking to myself, I don't want to spend my days doing things I don't enjoy. And at the same time, I'm not quite ready to retire and go full on a Bitcoin standard. So I decided I'm at least going to start a podcast so that I can talk to Bitcoiners because I really enjoy that. And I put it off for a long time because I'm not a techie person. I have no editing experience. I love YouTube, but I don't know how to do it myself. I was dabbling in it a little bit. And I just decided as I grew as a person, it's no time now to sit down and say, I'm not going to start because I don't know what I'm doing. I'm going to jump in, just learn as I go. And at the same time, I get to speak to wonderful Bitcoiners. So that's why I decided to start it.
Wow. Yeah, that's amazing. I think more people need to think that way. And I was just re-listening to it because this monologue is kind of inspiring. American Hodl, there's this YouTube short out there. I'll send it to you. Maybe you've seen it already, but where he talks about how the fiat mindset is a disease of the mind. Fiat is a disease of the mind. And if you really think about it, it stops people from doing the things they want to do because they overanalyze all these things and they say, oh, well, I have to do this and I have to do this and I have to earn more debt-based money before I do. And then at the end, he just goes, do what you want to do. Just do it. And I think more people need to think that way. I'm not perfect at it, but like you said, our time is our most valuable resource, and you're not going to get more of it. And, there's a saying where it says, tomorrow is the devil's day. Just let it happen tomorrow. Tomorrow, tomorrow, tomorrow. Do it now. And so I really respect that about you. And I've listened to your podcast many times. And how we got in contact was, for anybody listening, is you interviewed one of my good friends, Kyle Silvestri, And that was the first exposure I had to your content. And tell me, after all these conversations you've had with a lot of Bitcoiners, leaders in the space, so to speak, really influential people, I saw you had Jeff Booth on. That was really cool. What were some of the biggest things you've learned?
Yeah, that's a great question. I have learned honestly from every single person that I speak to. And some of them are new in the space, and I still learn from them. I see things from a different angle. And I also learn from the old guys, the old G's, the OGs, I mean, like Jeff Booth. Jeff Booth for me is one of my most sought after for me personally, because I I learned from him in such a different way. He speaks about Bitcoin so differently than anybody else. And I hear a few people starting to speak like him now, but not quite. I haven't seen anybody as convicted that Bitcoin is going to be the only network going forward without a doubt, and it cannot exist. Fiat cannot exist while Bitcoin exists. They cannot exist together because Bitcoin is the free market and fiat is, well, a debt-based system that most of us Bitcoiners are trying to get away from. And yeah, and yet when I press him on it, and I'm going to be interviewing him again next month, and I do feel I have learned since then. But yeah, when I press him on it, he doesn't think he's different. He doesn't think that he has vision. So I find that quite interesting. He's very humble. I've Everybody I learned something different from. I've learned from, it's really hard to say, because I've learned from people who talk about mining. I've learned from people like Kyle who start meetups and tell me the benefits, so much benefit from the meetup, because I myself haven't gone to many. And so I don't have that feeling, but it's in the back of my mind that I need to do it, because I recently did my first spaces on X, not because I want to grow so much on X, it's just because I want to keep talking with Bitcoiners. And yeah, I think I've learned a lot of different things from a lot of different people.
I went to a meetup last night that our community put together, and we don't live in a huge city. So I would say Spokane is the greater area, maybe, compared to like New York and Seattle and Miami and Dallas and LA, like it's a pretty small city. But we had about 25 people, and over the last year, it's just grown so much. And there were a lot of people who didn't end up coming. So we could have easily had 30, 33 people, 34. And there's just something truly special that happens when Bitcoiners, people who see the world the same, they see the problem, they appreciate the solution, and they get together. And what's remarkable is that nobody hardly ever mentions the price of Bitcoin. That might be my favorite part, is nobody ever mentions the price. Because we're past that. We are adopting new money. We're saving in Bitcoin. And that's just so, and so the conversations, the laughter, the like-mindedness, it's something really cool. And so yeah, meetups are awesome. There's a bunch in Miami, so yeah, you should hit one up.
I know I'm going to get there. Like I told you before, I spend a lot of time editing, and then I have a full-time fiat job,
Mm.
and you mentioned price, and I also try to stay away from price, because we all know one Bitcoin is one Bitcoin. And the funny thing is, though, is that in order for some of us to move on to the Bitcoin standard, it is, it might, for me personally, the price would have to go a little bit up for me to feel safe. And that's just my own journey. Um, However, I am on the Bitcoin standard as much as I can. I do use Bitcoin when I can. Not a lot. I have to say I mostly store my value and my energy in Bitcoin. But for a retirement type idea or moving to just a full-time YouTube position or another, in a Bitcoin job, I feel more comfortable knowing that I have a certain amount in the back of my mind. And that's a fiat mindset. I know that. I know I have been conditioned. You talked about that at the beginning, and I was just thinking, we are so conditioned to go to school to get a job that produces lots of fiat so that we can live in the world rather than trying to do what we love. And then when doing what you love, the rest will follow if you do it well. In a free market, when you do something well, you will get rewarded. But unfortunately, in our fiat world, certain jobs and certain professions do really well. So most people go towards those, whether they love them or not. So I'm working my way out of the fiat mindset and into the Bitcoin mindset, and yeah, making things work. I spoke to somebody in my podcast, Max DeMarco, and I said, what do you do when the price drops 30% and you're all in, on Bitcoin? He says, I cut back my expenses. He says, I just throw out some things that I don't need in my life. and yeah, it's just a whole new way of thinking about it. And yeah, I am moving towards that, not focusing on price.
Yeah. I saw you had a podcast where you spoke with your mom about Bitcoin. Has she come around a little bit more? Have there been any updates? Because you mentioned her age. I think she's in her 80s. And what's her understanding like? Because I thought that was a brilliant episode you did. I thought it was really entertaining.
Funny you ask about that. Today she asked me, has the price of Bitcoin gone up a little bit? And I said to her, whether it goes up or not, I'm all in on Bitcoin because it's a better way of life. It's a better system. And I went over again a little bit about it. It's an honest system. Nobody can print anymore. It's, 21 million. I didn't go into all that, but I just made it clear that there's much more to Bitcoin than the price. So she's still a bit focused on that along with everybody else, but at least people are more aware of it now. And yeah, I don't think I don't know if my mom will ever get there. I'm hoping to get some of my other family members there, but yeah, we'll see.
Yeah. The my grandmother, who she passed away a couple years ago, but so my family on one side of my family is from Argentina, and so I was down there and I was visiting my grandmother, and in Argentina, they've really suffered with inflation over the last 20 years, and I was lucky in that case because I came with dollars, which was the superior currency compared to the Argentinian peso, but it was so funny because my grandma, every time I would spend money, she's kind of in her old ways telling me, you shouldn't spend so much money. You're wasting so much money. And I'll tell you, like the price of food, it was practically free. My wife and I, we went to an all-you-can-eat Argentinian steakhouse and bottle of wine, dessert, my kids, like we all ate like royalty, and it was $30. And to her, if you convert that into pesos, that's a lot of money to her because when she was young and working and trying to save money, that actually was a lot of money. But because of how much inflation they've had, it really wasn't. And I mean, it would be even cheaper today, probably. I know their economy's come back a little bit more, but especially on Bitcoin, since the price has gone up, it'd be cheaper. But and so I feel bad because all her savings and that money is worthless. And so I understand you are from Zimbabwe, is that right?
Yes.
So you know a thing about your country's history with inflation.
Yeah, and you give a really good example. And I think a lot of people in the Western world don't realize that the people who live in Argentina and Zimbabwe, those prices are expensive for them because they don't make the income that we make here. But even Zimbabwe's a little bit different because they use the US dollar mostly now. And the price of a meal can be almost the same as it is here. So most people cannot afford that. You can find cheaper and less expensive meals. But for example, if I go and buy regular butter, it can be $8. So if I buy organic butter in the US, it's 6.57, but butter, $8, just regular butter, that's very expensive. And most people, they only make $200 a month. So there's no way they're buying butter.
Hmm.
And so it's just a difference of if you are lucky enough to be earning a good salary, then have your own business, then there's a few people who live quite well. But the the Zimbabwe currency is in use there as well, and that has failed at least 7 times. And just like your grandmother, my family, my mom lost all of her retirement overnight because they took 13 zeros off overnight off the bank, and she had her money in the bank and it was just gone. 13 zeros gone.
Wow.
And that's happened several times. So, yeah, it's amazing to me that people continue to trust the uh, the government. Obviously, less people keep their money in the bank now, and it's more mattress. But at the same time, most people don't see a problem with the US dollar. They might see a problem with the Zimbabwe dollar, but they don't see a problem with fiat currency. So I suppose, like for everybody, it's a case of learning what the problem is, going down that rabbit hole to answer the question, what is money? Then everyone sees inflation, but then getting to the solution is Bitcoin. That's a whole nother leap. And yeah,
You have to understand what the problem is first.
yeah.
When, how old were you when you moved to the United States?
Yeah, so I grew up in Zimbabwe and I left when I was 17 to come to the US on a tennis scholarship. So my family still lived there. Most of my family still lived there. And I go back to visit often. But yeah, I was a bit clueless about what is money. But even back then, when I left the US, the Zimbabwe dollar was 1-to-1 with the US. And it was a relatively strong currency. From there, we have gone to, we all know there's $1 trillion Zimbabwe notes. So yeah, with all my education and of living in the US and Zimbabwe, I've seen the inflation. It wasn't until 2017 that I really started thinking about it. And the reason I think I started thinking about it is I started realizing I hadn't quite saved enough for retirement and I better start thinking about it because now getting to the age where it's time to stop messing around. I was putting a little bit away, but when you live in the US or Canada, or what it takes to retire here is a lot more than it takes in some places. So it's all relative. And that's what got me thinking about it. And that's what kind of led me to Bitcoin.
Yeah, so you're a tennis player. Do you still play?
I don't. I'm so competitive and yeah, I played professional too and just for a little while. But I'm so competitive that if I'm going to play, I've got to play well. And I know some things are worth doing even if we don't do them well. But because I was a high level in tennis, and then mm, I also realized that, it's just a game. So it's also nice to just go out and have fun sometimes. But then the people I play with are so competitive. And then I think, well, there's more to life than just trying to beat people on the tennis court. So I do like to watch, and I do appreciate good athleticism in any sport. But yeah, I'm focusing more on Bitcoin.
Yeah. Where did you play tennis? What college did you get a scholarship to?
University of Miami.
And was that pretty fun playing tennis?
It was a Division I school. I had a great time playing. I made All-American. And yeah, I had a lot of because Miami's so far, it's so foreign, it's so international. I had a lot of foreign players on the team, and yeah, it was a really great experience.
That's
And I think so because of that, I've always been into health. And then I got into the health industry, and I've enjoyed that. But I always think about there's the three areas of life we really have to focus on, which is, well, the spiritual side. It's a really important to have good health and fitness, and then also taking care of our money. And so those three areas are where I put my focus. But I've kind of got the health down after all this time, and my health is good. I'm grateful for that. I really should be doing a YouTube channel on health because that's where most of my knowledge is in. But I also found I don't want to try to convince people anymore. Just like with Bitcoin, I there's so much information out there, even on the health side. And so with Bitcoin, I speak to people who are sometimes smarter than me and give us the information, and then it's there for everybody else to hear, what makes sense to you.
yeah. Yeah, so going back to your time in Zimbabwe, I think I was reading about it this morning. You mentioned the $100 trillion banknotes, which are, you can buy them on eBay and they're actually not cheap now. So maybe it would have been worth it to hold on to a big pile of those and you can sell them on eBay. But yeah, it experienced something like 60 sextillion% inflation. And I just don't even know we can't wrap our minds around that number. I mean, even the number 100 trillion. I know a trillion seconds is 30,000 years. So you'd have to multiply that, but 30,000 by 100, which would be um, 3, 3 million years. Is that right? Maybe 3 million years? 3 million years in seconds. So did when that was happening, do you ever remember having to use a 100 trillion dollar banknote to buy anything?
I don't remember that, but I do remember my dad coming home with suitcases of money in 2008, suitcases of money all over the living room floor, counting the money and then saying, we got to go spend it now. Everybody knew we have to go spend it now because in hours or the next day, it's going down. So that has been the mentality there for a long time. And I do see it in some of my family members. It's like money is hot potatoes in your pockets and you got to spend it. And it's a little bit here too, I think, with the idea our money is losing value over time. It's slower, but yeah, it's definitely in the mentality over there because of that. It's going down, and still to this day, I tell my mom every time I go back, she does get some money in the Zimbabwe dollar. I say, Mom, spend it as quick as you can. It's going down daily. Spend it, and that's where we get to our Bitcoin discussions.
Yeah. My uncle in Argentina and some family members, they're the same way. I don't, it was not as bad as Zimbabwe, but it was still pretty bad. And so, you could buy a car and that would be the store of value, and you could actually sell the car for more in a couple of years. And so people are constantly, you don't want to have cash. And I wonder how many times does this need to happen to a country before people see that it doesn't work? It happened in France, in Germany. It almost happened in the United States very closely. I was just reading a book by Richard Mayberry, and he's still alive, but I've been trying to track him down. I don't know what he's doing. But he wrote two books that I've been reading. One was called Whatever Happened to Penny Candy and the Mystery of Money. And this was before Bitcoin, but he's talking like a Bitcoiner. And in the Whatever Happened to Penny Candy, he talks about inflation and what happens with the demand for money. And he talks about how in 1979 in the United States, and I might be getting some of the details wrong on this, but 1979, 1980, there was an Iranian hostage situation where I think Nixon froze Iranian assets that were held in the United States. And that caused a lot of foreign investors who had holdings in the United States. They were holding American assets, dollars in bank accounts, and they were trying to liquidate their assets and get their money out of the United States because they were thinking, well, what if this happens to us? What if the president freezes our assets and things like that? And so there was a lot of money printing going on, and but what really almost sent us into hyperinflation was that the demand for dollars crashed. And Richard Mayberry, in his book, he says when the demand for dollars goes down, all bets are off. The government can stop printing money, but even if they stop printing money and the demand goes down, you could have really bad. Your money can become just as worthless if people realize that the money is not good for anything. So we came very close in 1979, 1980, and the more time that goes by where that's not happening, it gets closer and closer and closer. It's like these are two non-parallel lines that are just getting closer, and you have to continuously thread the needle to get it right. And you have the risk of inflation on one side, and you have the risk of deflation on the other side, which could be really hard for a lot of people.
Yeah. Yeah, it is actually quite confusing, but I always go back to now, well, the US dollar is the reserve currency of the world. So there is still quite high demand.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, especially in places like Zimbabwe, the US dollar is a much better alternative. And I'm sure in Argentina
Mm-hmm.
too. And that's where we get lucky as, having the world reserve currency. However, yeah, we've seen with the BRICS countries, they're trying to get away a little bit from the US dollar, and that inflation is actually, they are keeping it down, but at the same time, I think those numbers are not quite correct. If I look at my grocery bills, things are definitely up more than they say, and yeah, and then they always also have that ability to print money. So there's very smart people in the government right now, and I do like that they are trying to bring down expenses and cut all the excess. But I think in the long run, we are on a debt-based system. The people at the top will always benefit the most, even though we might do better for a short time. Long term, unfortunately, they are going to have to print, as Larry Lepard says in his book, The Big Print, at some point. And yeah, it's and then as you mentioned, deflation with AI coming, everything is supposed to be going down, but because we don't live in a free market, it doesn't fully go down. But prices should be going down. Everything's becoming more efficient, everything's becoming better. But prices really are not going down. So it's definitely a game they play with inflation, deflation, and deflation would not be good for a debt-based system.
No, especially not if it just hit you so quickly overnight. The prices would increase. I'm sorry, the prices would decrease, but that nobody would have money to spend because people are holding money and hoarding it because the value's going up rapidly. And so most Americans don't have $400 in their bank account. And so if you had deflation hit and most Americans don't have $400 in their checking account, the extremely wealthy have dollars, they have all the dollars, but like everyday normal citizens don't. And so even if the prices were to go down in a rapid deflation, they wouldn't be able to buy anything. So, what are your plans kind of going forward with your podcast? And do you have any new ideas, new ambitions, future guests, sneak peeks?
Yeah, so I just filmed my number 100. I heard that it would be good to film 100 to see whether you really like it. Bram Canstein told me that, and then somebody else told me that as well, who'd filmed 100. And yeah, I was thinking, have I improved that much? Uh, with this, it's making sure you have good thumbnails, good titles. All that takes another skill, which I don't necessarily have. But I am going to keep going. I film. You mentioned I filmed a couple with my mom, and I've filmed a couple on my own. But what I really like doing is talking to Bitcoiners more than just filming myself. Although I know people like that because they get to know you a little bit. I will continue to record with Bitcoiners, and I've been lately filming with a lot of people who are on the Bitcoin standard. So I have that one coming up. People living on the Bitcoin standard. And then, yeah, Jeff Booth is coming up, James Lavish, and Efrat from Israel. So, yeah, I find it harder to get women guests. Women often say no. The guys are great, and they there are more men in Bitcoin. But yeah, I'm just gonna keep going, and if I get taken in any direction, then I'll just follow that. But doing my best to keep up the filming and then follow my intuition.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Do you have a most memorable episode? Like if you had to just pick one.
Well, that's really hard to pick one. Obviously, Jeff Booth is my most memorable. And it's so funny because I filmed with him before anybody. He is one of the kindest, most humble people, and he will speak with anybody who wants to speak with them. And I didn't know what I was doing. My sound wasn't right. There's a little bit of a background sound. And I wanted to, do a lot more with that video, but I was so new. So that's one of my most memorable because honestly, I couldn't believe that he was going to talk to me. I actually, when he came on, I cried. I'm not a crier. I am from Zimbabwe and we are British. I mean, I'm more Danish, but we are the British. You don't cry. I'm like, I'm sorry, Jeff, I have to go. It was emotional for me. Yeah. Since then I have got better at it. And, you know, I also filming with Seb Bunny. I think Seb Bunny is one of the most underrated people. His knowledge about money is incredible, and yeah, I really his insights into money is 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 memorable too. But there have been so many, and some with some people that nobody knows and didn't get a lot of views, but they were some of my, most memorable podcasts, and they didn't get the views. But yeah, Jim Crider, he is a financial planner in the Bitcoin space, one of the few, and hardly anyone watched that episode, but it was really great. And that's my fault because I don't put the right thumbnail and because I don't really have time to go back and change things. Sometimes I do, but yeah, I've got my job too. So I do my best, and yeah. But I honestly can say that I have enjoyed speaking to almost every guest, and like I said, I've learned from everybody, and yeah.
I did listen to the Seb Bunny, the Jeff Booth, and I think the other one you mentioned. Yeah, those were all really good. You've recorded. I'm on. This is episode 16 for me, so I'm really just on the beginning of my podcasting journey. And so you're an inspiration to me. And so thank you for not quitting and continuing, because like so many podcasts start and then they don't end up reaching 20 episodes. And I think you're an inspiration for a lot of people who think, man, should I start a podcast, or should I start a blog, or should I start writing about Bitcoin? And like you just did it. And that's really amazing.
Well, I appreciate it, and like I mentioned to you, I I didn't start for 2 years because I didn't think I was good enough. I didn't think it was my profession. I didn't think that I knew enough about all of this. But then I realized that I do have something to say, and that maybe I can bring on people who have something to say that can provide value for people, because I think you're doing a great job too. What I've learned is that different voices appeal to different people. And there are incredible podcasts out there, and I listen every day. I listen to so many podcasts, but I've been told by some people that they like the way I interview or they like my approach. And the same's going to be for you. And so, I spoke to Stacy, and Stacy, that was a great interview too. And she said to me, I I was thinking of starting a podcast. I said, start. I mean, for one thing, we need more women, and we need more people to get the word out about Bitcoin. So I really encourage people to keep going, because you just never know who your audience is going to be. I thought I'd get more women, and I ended up getting more men, because there are men in the Bitcoin space. And but I don't mind who I get. I'm open to, speaking to everybody. Obviously, I speak to a lot of men. I really enjoy speaking to everybody. But yeah, I think we all have a unique voice, and the more that we get the word out about Bitcoin, the better.
Yeah. Next month, I'm planning a meetup, and we're going to call it BARN. And it's an acronym. It stands for Bring a Real Normie.
That's great.
So, because we had 25 people last night at our meetup. Imagine if everybody just brought one friend, we'd double our numbers. And just the laws of things that grow by exponentially, if somebody just keeps inviting one person and you keep doubling in size, and lo and behold, more and more people are learning about sound money principles and how inflation is really hurting them. And what I notice is that a lot of our meetups, a large percentage of people are like deeply religious and have an inner sense of a strong inner sense of right and wrong. Whether they agree completely on the source of that, but there's a there's an inner sense of it's not right that I trade my time for this money, and the value can be stolen from me. And so I think that appeals to just everyday people. You don't have to be a Bitcoiner to understand that stealing is wrong. And so there's just a lot of people are passionate about that and can resonate with that too. I wanted to ask, what kind of things are you into just outside of Bitcoin, outside of real estate? Do you enjoy history? Do you enjoy cooking? Do you enjoy, like you mentioned tennis, right? But are there any other subjects that you like to get into, or any hobbies you have?
So I have always had an interest in fitness, working out. So that's kind of an interest, and something that I need to do to stay in shape, because you can't sit inside all day and be on the computer. It's part of balance in life. Yeah, I really enjoy travel. So I always have to balance that between, should I be traveling or buying Bitcoin? But that's part of my balance. It's really important I go see my family. And so I do that. And I've always had an interest in personal development. So before I started the Bitcoin journey, I was interested in, not in particular anybody in particular, but Tony Robbins and Abraham Hicks and people like that, to get my mindset right. Because I realized that growing up in Zimbabwe, I had a little bit of a poverty mindset. I got a lot of mixed messages. My family did quite well, and sometimes this can also come from religion, sometimes, that being poor is more noble, because I don't know where I got this message, but that having too much, you might get greedy, or yeah. So I got that message a little bit, and I had to reprogram my mind to think, no, there's, in order to be fully self-sufficient, I needed to believe that I could achieve financial independence, because when you have financial independence, you can then live the life you want to live. You can give back. There are a lot of good people with money. Not everybody is greedy and printing money at the top, although there are some of those. And yeah, so I had to re-educate my brain on what money is, and before even I got to Bitcoin. And so yeah, I know I'm not great with interests. I I've always been, when I played tennis, I was focused 100% on tennis, and then I went 100% into health and fitness, and now I'm in Bitcoin. So I tend to let things fade at the wayside. I can definitely improve on the fun and interest.
But that's also good because your attention is not divided, because that can be a weakness for some people. I need to learn how to split my time in between just a few things, because you can't do 100 things. You mentioned reprogramming the way you think about poverty, and I come from a Christian worldview, and I see that where a lot of people in Christianity glorify poverty, that you are somehow more noble because you're in poverty. And I understand that poverty can teach you a lot of lessons. And there's like a sanctification process that can happen as through going through poverty and overcoming adversity. And there's tons of lessons to be learned. But there's one sect within Christianity that sort of glorifies it and discourages people from pursuing wealth or from building. And I would say what you're seeing in another sect is where there's a sect of Christianity that does not do that. If you're poor, you're poor, okay, but how are you going to be a good steward of the things you've been given? And really, if you're on this earth, you should be productive with your time and working. And maybe you don't become a billionaire. Most of us are not going to have that, but to improve your lot in life. And I think that message is gaining a lot of traction right now. And I really like that because, like you were saying, if you've accumulated wealth because of you were a good steward of your time and you provided value. I think that's what people forget is, like, if people who have acquired a lot of wealth, aside from just winning the lottery and getting lucky, generally it's because you've provided value of some sort. And I think, imagine if the whole world thought like that and were trained from a young age to how to do that. And so I'm still learning, but I think glorifying poverty for poverty's sake is not a good thing. I read a book that talked about what does it mean to be truly happy and where does true happiness come from? And the writer in this book was saying that we become happier the more we become like God. Now, we can never become exactly like God, right? We can't. But as we become more like Him, right, in our sufficiency, mortality, like power, that the the definition of true happiness is the possession of everything that's good in its perfected state. And I believe that as you go through life, you can get little tastes of that as you live your life for God and you live in step with the teachings of the Bible and you commit your life to God. And as you are productive with your time, you can get a little taste of what sufficiency feels like. And that's an incredibly satisfying feeling when you don't rely on other people. Like God relies on nobody. And I think we can get little tastes of that as we grow our own food. You have money that doesn't depreciate. You can get a little taste of immortality as you have children and reproduce. You have the future in mindset, and as you combine all those things and you bring them into harmony with one another, not to glorify yourself, but generally it's like a giving. And I think that the Christianity that has that in mind is the kind that really appeals to me. And that is true Christianity, is to be productive with your time and to not just bury your talent, so to speak, and put it in the ground, but to actually be productive with it. And as you're doing that, I think, it's incredibly satisfying. I think that's what God intended for us to, how He intended for us to experience like happiness, because it's ultimately found in Him, but we still have a real life to live, and it's not just doing nothing.
Yeah. And Bitcoin is particularly self-sovereignty and self-responsibility is part of being a Bitcoiner. And what I've learned over time is that by being self-supporting and taking care of myself, that gives me a lot of empowerment. But yeah, I don't want handouts. I've never taken handouts. That's just doesn't appeal to me. But I'm not saying some people don't need some help. I'm not saying that, but not ongoing forever. I believe that everybody feels more empowered when they take care of themselves, and that gives a lot of, self-esteem to people. But where I was going with that is you mentioned purpose too, and I think everybody does have a purpose. And I don't think it's so simple and easy to see for everybody, but I do know we all given gifts and talents, and I do believe we all have a purpose. So when I was going through a bit of a crisis, that's where I started studying people like Tony Robbins and Bob Proctor too, from Canada. And Bob Proctor always used to start out with, you need to find your purpose. And I didn't know my purpose. And that caused me a lot of pain at one point. And then I realized that's silly. Life is just take the next right step. Take the next step, see what you enjoy. And when I found Bitcoin gave me a whole new sense of purpose, because I know that you and I are much further ahead than many people in Bitcoin. For maybe not people who watch the channel, but many people out there, because for some reason they don't want to see it. So Bitcoin, living on the Bitcoin standard rather than the fiat standard, which promotes that short-term thinking. Let me spend my money, because subconsciously I know money's going down, and the short-term thinking, because who knows what the future is going to be like. Let me just buy frivolous things today. Bitcoin gave me a whole new sense of purpose. No, I don't need to buy things I don't need today. I can put that money in Bitcoin. I can store my energy in Bitcoin and my time, and that can provide a better future, but also knowing that I can also live for today and balance that with the future time. But I don't need to spend on things I don't need, because I always think about, well, could that be better spent on Bitcoin, or do I really need that? And before, I would just buy what I wanted. I make the money, just buy what I wanted. That's why I hadn't really saved enough for retirement, because I was thinking short term, and Bitcoin changed my thinking. And also, going down the rabbit hole made me realize self-responsibility is really important. And now I see why. Self-sovereignty is important too. And yeah, and those are just a few of the lessons from Bitcoin.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of lessons that Bitcoin teaches you, especially with delayed gratification, and to just, I would say, being patient. I was talking to a guest who got out of Bitcoin because he was checking his phone, the price the whole time. And I get it. Like when you first get into Bitcoin, the price is really interesting. And you think that you might lose money in the event of an hour, right? You're like, oh my gosh, it's gone down a few $1,000s in 1 hour. I'm losing. But the amount of Bitcoin you hold has not changed. And you need to think broader, because just remember the sound money principles. They can't make more of it. They cannot make more of it. It is deflationary in nature, and there's a limited supply. They can't counterfeit it, and it's yours. You're gonna be okay. You know, we can have a high degree of confidence. Like nobody knows what's gonna happen tomorrow, right? Like if the internet just completely got wiped out for some time, like that would be really bad. So nobody knows the future. But what is the best bet? Is it fiat or Bitcoin? And it has to be Bitcoin. Paul, I just really want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. Thank you for coming on the show, for, being such a great guest. And thank you for the content you provide and just the testimony and the example for other people that you are. So if anyone's out there, thinking about starting a podcast, like I think of you, like 100 episodes, you've had some amazing guests to come on your show. And like, I'm excited to see, like, I want to be like you. So,
Well, you already are. You're on number 16. Just keep going, and definitely send me a message when you're on 100, because I think you're going to do great.
well,
I
thank you.
really
Yeah.
enjoyed this. Thank you.
Yeah, I did as well. So, if you would like to follow Paula, what the name of your podcast is, The Bitcoin Edge, and same thing on YouTube.
Yep. The same thing on YouTube, Bitcoin Edge, and on X, Bitcoin Edge, or under my name. So thank
Awesome.
you.
Well, thanks so much, Paula. Maybe we can do it again sometime.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Have a good day.